To our museum. We are very happy to present this artist talk between the museum Vanabe curator Nick Aikens and one of the apostles of postcolonial art, Rasheed Araeen. I hope that you've already seen the exhibition. If you haven't, please go there after the talk. It's on the second floor in the skylight. You will see in the atrium of the museum a big tower. It's an homage to the Tatlin Tower that unfortunately was implemented only now. Together with the artists, we are very happy to see all of you here, and we are happy to present to you the beautiful catalogue of the exhibition. It's very bright, and soon we are going to publish essays by Rasheed Araeen since 1970s till 2010s. There'll be an introduction by Valentin Diakonov. In short, this exhibition traveled to 4 big museums and centers. It traveled to Eindhoven, to Vanabe Museum, then it traveled to Geneva Museum of Contemporary Arts. And the final location is this very venue, the Garage Contemporary Art Museum. Here the exhibition actually grew. We have the tower, and we'll have a performance at the finissage, at the closing of the exhibition. Please come. It will be a dance performance. So this exhibition is accompanied with unique events, and most probably you've seen some of the objects already in the atrium of the museum. I won't steal any more time of yours. I will present again our speakers, Nick Aikens and Rasheed Araeen. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. Спасибо. Здравствуйте. It's really wonderful to be here. On the first public day, the first open day of Rasheed's exhibition. Before we begin, I just wanted to say, I think on behalf of myself and Rasheed, a huge thank you to everyone at the Garage team, to Kate Fowl, who made the original invitation, to Yaroslav, to Valentin, to Nastia, to everyone. There's been incredible work and energy and resources that's gone into making this a wonderful finale to the exhibition tour. As Yaroslav says, there's many elements here that have not appeared elsewhere, and that's really testament to the kind of commitment and vision of Garage to go the extra mile. So just a huge thank you for all that's gone into it. So it's really wonderful to be talking here with Rasheed. I say at the beginning that Rasheed has quite a bad throat, so hopefully the throat will be kind, but there might be some gaps for some coughing, but hopefully we can work through it. I think what we wanted to do today, or what I wanted to do today, whenever I sit down to have a conversation with Rasheed, sometimes I think of questions I'll ask him, and very quickly those questions are either ignored or or he takes it somewhere completely different. So today what I think we'll do is just show some images of works, and I'm going to ask Rasheed, or maybe give some prompts to Rasheed to talk through them. I mean, what you'll see upstairs in the exhibition is 60 years of work. 60 years of work that begins in the 1950s, as we'll see in a second, when Rasheed was living in Karachi, and comes right through till the most recent paintings that were produced last year, I think. It's a practice that begins and ends with painting, but has many different formats, objects, discourse, performance, writing, exhibition making along the way. An incredible range of work, an incredible approach. And I think what's so interesting about the format of the retrospective is that it allows you to track those different stages, see where different paths were taken, seeing where roads join up again, and particularly within the architecture of Garage, where you have this very open format, you get extraordinary encounters between many different decades. So you can stand at one end and you can see the top of the Tatlin Tower, and you can see works that happened in the 60s. You can go on to see the kind of photo montages of the 80s or the most recent paintings. So what's happened at Garage is you have an amazing conversation between the work, which we haven't been able to do elsewhere. So I'm going to put up the first slide. The first chapter, very early on in the discussions with Rasheed, when I went to see him in his studio in London, we decided on this idea of having chapters to the exhibition. And Rasheed, I think, had quite a clear idea in his mind, like what those chapters would consist of, and how they would be structured. And it begins with some of the early paintings that Rasheed did in the 1950s in Karachi. And Rasheed, maybe you could say a little bit about your kind of first encounters with art and how you came across art and what made you start painting people's portraits in Karachi in the 1950s.
Oh, God. Well, it's a long story. You might as well ask me how I begin my interest in art.
This is the question.
Well, I have responded to this question many times before. And that is, it was my mother who initiated me into not really art, but making images. I was 7 years old when one day my mother came with a piece of paper and a cloth. Asked me if I could trace flowers on a piece of cloth because she wanted to do some embroidery. So I did it. And she realized I was very good. So she came back again after 3 days, and she noticed I was not really tracing them, but while tracing them, I was correcting them. If the flower was not very symmetrical, I would make it symmetrical. And she was very impressed. So ultimately, it ended up making myself flowers. So that was the beginning. Also, in our, we live in the countryside.
You're not living in Karachi at that point?
No. We live in a very old, I get disturbed when people start talking among themselves. We were living in a small village on the seaside, and very old, primitive kind of village. There was no modernity except for gramophone. And there were no toys, the kind of toys children have.
No toys?
Usually have them. So my mother would make some clay and ask the children from the neighborhood to come and play with the clay. And we would make our own toys. So that's it. The two things happened in my childhood. Then we traveled from one place to other because of my father's job, and then nothing much happened. Eventually, we came to Karachi
What year is that?
when I was 10 years old. And my father got me admitted in the school. In the school, when I began to do drawing on paper, my teacher realized I was very good in drawing. And he encouraged me. So that was the beginning of my interest in drawing, which ultimately led me into this kind of work.
But Rasheed, you didn't have any training as an artist. You trained as an engineer, which would come to be an important aspect, I guess, of your thinking and your approach to form and structure. But early in 1958, we're looking at the Boats Towards Abstraction. There's an important shift in your work that goes from a kind of representational model, I suppose, to one of abstraction. You've talked to me before about the first moment that you started drawing these boats, not from having them in front of you, but from memory. And that seems to be an important shift in your work and your thinking. And particularly, as we'll see, the use of triangles and the beginnings of these kind of geometric forms. But I've always fascinated by this work, which is not in any way geometric. It's these very loose lines with the intriguing title Dancing Bodies. There's a few moments throughout in your life where you talk about these kind of moments of vision or trance or meditation. I was wondering if you could talk about the kind of moment or the inspiration for this work, and also perhaps we could talk about the Burning Tires piece as well.
Well, you have asked me 1,000 questions.
I was trying to give a summary of some things that we were looking through.
Big jump from the portraits.
Yeah. So maybe you'd like to say something about the shift from kind of representation to abstraction.
Can we go back to boats with the color?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Karachi, when I was encouraged by my teacher to do drawings, more drawings, in fact, my drawing teacher was so impressed. He said, "You should go to Bombay." I didn't understand what he meant, go to Bombay. I don't know audience would understand either what it meant. Karachi was part of the British Raj. There was no Pakistan, India in 46. Karachi was part of the University of Bombay, which is now in India. In Karachi, we had no art school. But in Bombay, there is a famous art school called JJ Art School. Only Afterward, when I came to know about the artwork, I realized my teacher meant me to go to JJ School of Art. Anyway, that encouraged me to do more work, and I started copying images, making portraits of famous people. One of the influence at that stage in my work was banner painters, those who would make banners.
Banner painters.
Yeah. Because on my way to school, there was a shop. We used to make banner. And I was very fascinated because he would bring out his banner outside the shop because there was no space in the shop. And he would paint. And while I would stand there with my book in my hand and watch him. And he used to enlarge a small image into a big one through graph method. And that is how I learned to enlarge the space image through a graph method. Perhaps that graph method is still in my book. Anyway, to cut the story short, to answer your question, after doing portraits, landscape, boats in the Karachi harbor, very realistically. One day in 1958, I was just playing around with a piece of paper and a pencil, something like that. And while I was drawing things, I drew vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines.
Гости Музея современного искусства «Гараж». Через 10 минут приглашаем вас в пространство Lab на воркшопы с художницей Каролиной H. Ларсон. Спасибо за внимание.
I realized I think I should give a gap for them to translate. I realized there were books in abstract form. So I picked up some colors and filled them up. And this came out of this. You can see all the lines which I drew instinctively. That was the beginning of my interest in abstraction. If abstraction is the right word, yeah.
I mean, the reason I wanted to spend time at the beginning is because I think, obviously, you're well known, perhaps internationally, most for your editorship of Third Text, but I think it's really important to stress your beginnings as an artist, and an artist that didn't have a formal training, but was very much doing it out of a personal passion and interest and inquiry. And this is kind of most evident through the first room in the exhibition when you're working in Karachi. I'm going to skip through a little bit through some of these images just because I want to try and get through different stages of your work, Rasheed. And we're going to talk a little bit now about the second chapter, Geometry and Symmetry. And in 1964, you decide to leave Karachi.
Yeah.
you go on a boat to Paris.
Yeah.
You take some of your paintings with you.
Yeah.
And you get to Paris and you spend, what, a month there?
Yeah.
You don't like it very much.
No.
You don't understand what they're saying. You don't like the museums, too stuffy.
Yeah.
And
Mostly mediocre.
mostly mediocre. And what museums were you going to, by the way? d'Orsay, Louvre?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pompidou, I guess, wasn't... Yeah, Pompidou wasn't there at that point. Yeah. And a friend of yours was going to Britain, was going to London, and said, why don't you come with me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't get on the Eurotunnel then, you got on a boat. You've talked many times about the kind of encounter with some of the sculpture that you saw in Britain, and showing an image of Anthony Caro and the new generation sculptors. And at this point, you're very much working within a painterly practice. You got a job as an engineer in London, but then I think something quite radical happened in your work, or there's a real shift in emphasis, or a kind of wish to find a new language for your work. And then upstairs you'll see a series of drawings. Maybe you could talk about there's some wonderful coffee stains, wine stains on these drawings. But these were made at British Hydrocarbon Chemicals Limited, which became BP. Yeah. You're making these in your lunch break or at home? Yeah. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about this moment in 1965 and what you're trying to do with your artwork at this point?
Reason I went to Paris because of the history of modernism, beginning with the Impressionists, Cezanne, Cubism, Futurism, avant-garde in Russia. All those things, I was aware. I didn't know anything about England. I had no interest in England whatsoever. I knew a bit of New York, like abstract expressionism. But my interest was in Paris. Also about the bohemian life in Paris.
You wanted to be in the capital of the arts?
Yeah. I wanted to be bohemian, live like a bohemian. But when I saw the real thing in Paris, it was very commercial. People were only interested in themselves. There was no place where one could go and talk to people. So I got fed up. I actually wanted to go back home.
Okay. It was too expensive.
I wrote a letter to my friend in Pakistan. I said, I've come to a place which is not Paris, not my Paris. It's something very different. I think I should come back because I felt very sick, homesick.
Okay.
He wrote back saying, please don't come back. You will be considered coward.
A coward.
So I wrote to another friend in London. He said, why don't you come to London? You can at least speak people because of English language. So I packed it up and went to London. So I liked London in the beginning. I found London art scene quite vibrant and dynamic. There was less influence of America in London than in Paris.
Really?
Paris in '64 was full of American pop everywhere, which I hated. So this is how I ended up in London. After going through various jobs, working in cafes, I got a job as an assistant engineer. One afternoon in '65, of course, by then, I was already aware of the sculpture in Britain, particularly the work of Anthony Caro. And I became very fascinated by his work. I didn't see something like that in Paris. But a fascination of somebody with somebody is not enough. It doesn't take you anywhere. You have to find your own way. Although many people followed him and they never got anywhere. So, also, I didn't have the resources to make a sculpture. I had no training to make a sculpture. So there were a lot of difficulties, physical, economic, financial. I couldn't pursue sculpture. But that didn't stop me from thinking about sculpture. I think this is a very important point which people don't give enough consideration, that you don't have to think physically, but you can think about them. Thinking can lead you somewhere. So it was the thinking about sculpture. And I kept on thinking without any formulation of what would lead me to. At that point, I think I should make here quite often. I discover things by chance. Even before, when I was in Karachi, the idea of abstraction in book was discovery by chance. And then curvilinear form was also by chance. So I drew these drawings without thinking what I was doing. One day while I was working with the BP, engineering department, only after I have done the drawing, I realized I had discovered something. I realized that sculpture could be formulated symmetrically. And that was the beginning of my work in symmetry and in geometry and symmetry.
Which comes very much
Yeah.
from your background in engineering, one imagine.
Yeah.
There's an amazing moment upstairs when you walk from the first room in the beginning from Karachi through to the second room, geometry and symmetry. And if you just look in the lift shaft, you'll see that there's the structure of the building is absolutely this lattice structure that Rasheed deploys in his work. So it's very much a kind of architectural engineering language and form that you have in the work.
Probably it was the influence of engineering, because in the drawing office, most of the work I did was industrial, not the domestic architecture or commercial architecture, but industrial architecture, in which we have to draw a lot of structure. So that may be the influence.
And then very quickly you start experimenting. I mean, this is the form that I'm talking about, the lattice structure. This work is also upstairs 3Y plus 3B, so 3 yellow plus 3 blue. And amazing enjoyment of color, Rasheed. And I remember asking you very early on, expecting some elaborate sort of color theory, but very simply, there's just an enjoyment of color and making beautiful things. And I guess this is something that begins with the boats towards abstraction in Karachi and is there throughout the work. A kind of enjoyment in the aesthetics of the work and the aesthetics of color.
But it's strange enough, the work I brought to London with me didn't have a color.
It was black and white.
They were in black and white. And in the early structure, which I did in the maquette form, which you can see they are monochrome, either in the silver. That may be influence of constructivism, because they want to be faithful to the material. But then I got fed up, and particularly 68, when I made the 4 cubes, and I said it would be a good idea if all the 4 cubes are of different colors. This is how color came into my work. Yeah.
And there's a very interesting essay in the book by Michael Newman where he talks about your relationship to geometry and symmetry through this idea of a universalism, not a universalism as understood through Enlightenment thinking, but the idea that you are trying, through the use of geometry and symmetry, the idea that within symmetry, one side is equal to the other, that you have found a kind of formal language that embodied the idea of universalism. At this stage, however, in the 60s, was there a kind of ideological approach to your use of geometry and symmetry, or was it something intuitive that you got from your training as an engineer? Were you thinking through what it meant in terms of ideas or values to work with geometry and symmetry at that point?
No. I was doing it instinctively.
Yeah.
Through the material.
Yeah. And then in 1970, I guess it's this moment when your work first leaves the studio, quite sort of literally. And I have images of you sort of getting frustrated in your studio of being...
No, I wasn't frustrated.
No. But you do this performance in 1969, performance happening, action, whatever you'd like to call it, in 1969, where you release a series of discs into the water outside your studio in St. Catherine's Docks, and it's called Chakras Circles. What was the impulse to do that?
I had already developed the idea of symmetry and breaking symmetry. With the courtyard, which comprised of 4 cubes. After I did 4 cubes and painted them with 4 colors, when I tried to put them together, I realized there were many ways you can put them together. I said, that's a very good idea. That helped me to get away, I got rid of the idea of a fixed structure. Ultimately, soon after, I developed the idea of 100 cubes, which I would arrange symmetrically, then ask an audience to come and break the structure and make their own way different arrangement. This idea of breaking symmetry, fixed symmetry, and asymmetry already had existed in quantum physics. It is called symmetry breaking. Actually, the Nobel Prize winner in 2010, they used the idea of symmetry breaking to explain Big Bang theory. They give an example, and I can try to remember. In their description, they said, imagine a table and people are sitting around the table and there are wine glasses on the table, arranged symmetrically. When people pick up their own glasses, one glass, then get up and move around, they break symmetry. And that breaking of symmetry creates a movement which tends to go towards infinity. I was totally unaware of that. Anyway, I wasn't myself aware of this when I did this thing. But this idea of breaking symmetry again reoccurred in this throwing of disc on water. What I did, I chose 16 circles, which is the symmetrical structure. When you throw them on water, that symmetry breaks up. And they begin to arrange themselves and rearrange them constantly. And their arrangement and rearrangement and their interrelation can go on towards infinity.
And it was the basis for this idea is very much central to the Zero to Infinity piece, which you see in the hallway outside, where people are invited to rearrange the
You should
shapes.
go after and play with them. Yeah.
So I want to turn now to the a major shift in your work, which happens in the early 70s. And I want to talk about this piece, which for me is really a kind of, I'm only showing one panel here, but it's a 4-panel work, it's upstairs. And this piece for me is really a kind of archive of Britain in the early 70s, but also what Rasheed was doing in the first years of the early 70s. So what you see, I thought I had a picture of all of the 4 elements, but I don't. What you see in the first image is a series of photocopied newspaper articles that reports the death of a man called David Olawale. David Olawale was found dead in the River Aire in the city of Leeds in Yorkshire in England in 1969. It was, wasn't it? Because it's the anniversary this year. And there was a police investigation which found for the first time and the last time, actually, the police were found responsible for the death of a black man. He was a migrant, he'd come to Britain, he was homeless, and he was harassed by the police, and he was found dead in the river. And so this was the kind of first moment in Britain where institutional racism, I suppose, was exposed and called out. And Rasheed, you read about this a couple of years after it happened, no? In 1971.
Yeah, 71.
And you kind of put the articles to one side. You knew that this was important and you wanted to do something with it, but you were not sure what that would be. And then you were invited to take part in an exhibition in a public library in Swiss Cottage, near where you live. And you created this piece which had 4 panels, but that was presented in 4 parts, so 1 panel for each week. You took them in and out. And I just want to talk also a little bit through what you see here. So at the top you see Freedom News. Freedom News was the newspaper of the UK
Black Panther.
branch arm of the Black Panthers, which you joined in 72.
Yeah.
Below there are different kind of political pamphlets for projects or campaigns that you were involved in or associated with, particularly the visit of the Portuguese dictator in 73, 4.
Yeah.
So why this kind of overt, seemingly sudden politicization of your work? What was the trigger for this shift in not only how you were kind of thinking as a person, but also how you were thinking about your artwork?
Well, you want a short answer, a long answer?
I never know what your idea of short or long is. Why don't we start with the short and we see if we need longer?
Well, short answer will be British imperialism.
British imperialism. Okay, let me. How did British imperialism come into your kind of consciousness in a way that it wasn't there in the 60s when you're making geometric forms? What made you suddenly include references to imperialism and anti-colonial struggle in your artwork?
When I make a geometric work in the 60s, I wasn't aware of British imperialism. I was aware, but I thought it was gone. It was in the past.
You weren't aware of it in Karachi?
No. We didn't have an experience of imperialism. I did encounter, but that's a different story. It will take the whole session for that story to give you. I won't go into it. I'm thinking of how to answer your question. I can redo the whole thing to racism in the street level, which I often encountered when I arrived in London. But it didn't bother me. I thought there are stupid people around who are racist. I didn't think it had anything to do with art. I thought people in the art world must be nice people. So I carry on my work regardless of racism. Although I have always been politically active, but I have separated my political activity from art. They were two different things. In 1967, I joined a group in London who campaigned against military junta in Greece. That was the beginning of my political commitment in London. I had not yet become aware that I would be involved against the British system. Only in 1971, when I went around looking for a gallery to show my work, I realized racism of the art system. There were people who had galleries who liked my work, but they wouldn't show me.
Based on your
There's
nationality.
one example of a very important gallery who said, Rasheed, we love your work, but we are sorry we can't show you because gallery can only show American and English artists. It was that experience by which I became disillusioned, and I began to think where I have come to.
And
So it led me into thinking about British Empire, its legacies. I read Fanon, and all those things together made me join Black Panther. I thought since it was a political problem, you can only resolve it through political activity, but I was wrong. But it was a good experience going through political activity, which led me doing that work for all the world.
And then
it has a both visual level, which is easy to comprehend, but it also has a conceptual level. Number one, this was constructed not at home. It wasn't done at home. It was done during the exhibition. Actual work was done during the exhibition. I put a 4 feet by 4 feet panel in an exhibition where all the painting and works were displayed. I put a blank canvas and I start putting things every week. I change from one week to other. So for 4 weeks, there were 4 different partners. And since I was also by then become very much against imperialism, fascism, so one of the panel was about the fascist dictator of Portugal who came to London in 73. Welcomed by the Queen. Welcomed by the British Museum. And these are the people who talk about democracy and human rights. And they welcome the dictator.
Throughout the 70s, in the exhibition upstairs, I mean, there's an amazing shift from the beginning of the 70s to the end of the 70s. That goes from a kind of studio practice. Courtney Martin talks about it in her essay. It goes from a studio practice to a practice that encompasses writing. You launched the Black Phoenix Journal in 78, 3 issues of the Black Phoenix Journal. You do this, your first performance, I suppose, Packy Bastard portrait of the artist as a black person. You yourself become visible, present.
No, my first performance, which people are not aware of, was in 74.
Okay.
I put on a Pakistani dress and went in front of the mosque in Regent Park with the box. On the box was written, "Money for Palestinians." And I collected money for Palestine through a performance in 74, which is not recorded not in your catalog either.
Yeah.
Because I never told you.
No, you haven't. And then this is a work that for me is incredibly important in that it's the first time I think it's the first time that you appear in the work.
No, I appeared in Packy Bastard, which was 77.
Sure.
This is 79.
Okay, 76 to 79 we got here, but okay. But what's interesting about this piece is that you're there, but obviously your lattice work is behind. So you're carrying on making the lattice structures. This is very much running kind of alongside or with this new exploration of performance, of collage, of writing. And I want to stop very briefly on this piece, which is there's a couple of images of the ethnic drawings from the Arts Council, where there's a self-portrait with Urdu script on the top, written over. What does it say?
It says money thing.
Okay. What's the gist of it?
It says Baba Black Sheep.
It says that in English?
Yeah.
Also in Urdu?
You have to read it. It's scattered, B-L-A-C.
Yeah.
It's all scattered within the Urdu script.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Why were you bringing in Urdu into your work at this moment? What's the relationship between the self-portrait and the Urdu?
Well, by 70, after doing the performance, and the burning tide, in which I use my own body, my own face, which was to do with identity. It was not a search for identity, but a critique of the problematics of identity within imperialism. So I did a series of so-called self-portraiture, which led me into this work. And actually, in I think it's 1782. In 82, the major art venue in London, Hayward Gallery, announced submission of drawings for the annual exhibition. So I thought maybe I should submit a drawing. So I picked up a cardboard and began to draw my own face with the scribbling of script. I didn't like it. So I tried the second one. I didn't like it. So I kept on trying, end up into 4 panels. After I finished 4 panels, I liked them. So I didn't actually send them. I thought it was too good to submit to their judgment because they wouldn't understand it. So I kept it. I didn't send them.
They ended up buying it.
Yeah. No, they didn't buy it. Our counterpart did.
Okay. So, I mean, we're skipping over many things, but I think I want to touch briefly. We've probably got about 10 more minutes. Is that okay? I want to touch briefly on one of these series that you'll see upstairs in a kind of alcove gallery. This work from the Cruciform Series, what came to be known as the Cruciform Series. And you've talked really eloquently before, Rasheed, about your work on the one hand, your work or the kind of negotiation between a political awareness, a political involvement, and an aesthetic sensibility. And that sometimes the kind of pendulum goes very much one way, and at other times the pendulum goes very much the other way. In the 70s, of course, this pendulum is really very much at the political extreme. But then in the 80s, I think there's a certain kind of synthesis of your formal interests, formal awareness, and your politics, and a kind of working out, I suppose, a little bit of your relationship to imperialism. And these are quite complex images. And I mean, you've talked before about your kind of intuitive approach to making works. Does that continue in a piece like this, where you have, you know, the figure of Marilyn, you have a soldier who's lying face down with some blood, you have images of veiled women through these green panels. There's a very complex set of references. How were you pulling these images together? Were you just putting them together and then thinking about what that meant afterwards, or was there a much more calculated approach at this point to...
I never make a calculation.
Okay.
I leave to the imagination do the work for me.
And the critics can calculate it afterwards.
Yeah.
Because throughout this series, I mean, this is a kind of image that's taken from the Iran-Iraq War.
Yeah.
You have images upstairs from the first Gulf War. the Bosnian conflict. So these are all kind of different neo-imperial struggles, I guess, that are happening from the 70s right through to the mid-90s. This is a piece called Bismillah from the Tate collection. And it would be, very foolish of us not to mention Third Text, which launches in 1987 and would kind of occupy you for right up until 2011. I always love showing it after the green paintings, because to have this first green edition. I mean, it's been such an important platform for discussions around the development of anti-colonial writing, the development and critique of post-colonial theory, certainly the critique of multiculturalism. Looking back on it now, and it's very hard to, I guess, summarize your thoughts on Third Text, but what do you see as Third Text's kind of major contribution to discourse from England or from Europe? What's the thing that you're most proud of about Third Text when you look back at what you did with it now?
I can't pick up one thing from it and say I'm proud of it. I'm proud of that Third Text become a collective platform. It wasn't my own journal. I was only managing it. It was a voice from everywhere. Even from Russia. We did a special issue on Russia, edited by Victor Trubitson. I don't know how many people knows about that.
What sort of year was that?
I think early 2002 or something like that. So it was my ambition has been to write from the 68 to move toward the collective. And through Third Text, I was managed to bring people together on a single platform, and that is what Third Text was.
And were you conceiving it at that time as an art project?
Yes, I conceive it as an art project,
And people who were working on it were also thinking that, did you
no,
just...
they won't.
It was an art project for you.
They joined me as a workers. They need their jobs and eventually, because they were not involved ideologically, it was very hard to find people who would work with me on that level. So I had to find anybody who would operate a computer, who would do copy editing, all those things, who would deal with the art council. When it came to the crunch, I didn't get support from them.
When it came to what? The art
crunch.
Oh, when it came to the crunch. Yeah. And then you'll encounter volumes of Third Text that were produced when Rasheed was editor in the final room, in the skylight room of the exhibition. I think what's so this.
This is Venice.
This is Kassel. This is Documenta. And so you conceived this installation, the reading room, I think the first time around 2007 or something for ZKM. The first time you did the reading room. Around 2007.
2011.
Okay.
And at Karlsruhe in Germany.
Yeah. And so you'll see elements of the Third Text on top of Rasheed's structures. And this was a Documenta last year, 2 years ago now,
2017.
2017, exactly. And behind them a series of your new opus paintings, which I think is the last thing that we'll talk about. I'm always amazed looking at these paintings. And I think what's so nice about having them in the reading room, which is the first time we've done it on the exhibition tour, is you can look at these paintings and you can see, or I can see, Mondrian, de style, constructivism. You can see Islamic tiles. You can see all these many different visual cultural references depending on who you are and where you're looking at it from. And I think probably to have this in relationship to Third Text, which was very much, I see one of its kind of founding missions was to think about relationships between center and periphery and complicate those relationships. What were the kind of visual references to create these opus paintings? Were you thinking through those things, or is that just my reading to look at that and see Malevich's Black Square or Mondrian's grids?
No. Nothing like that. If you come to my house in London, you will see those black and white tiles in the floor.
And there we have it.
You haven't?
No, I've seen them. I was just saying, there we have it. That's the influence.
Yeah. I've been thinking about those black and white patterns for a long time. I don't know what to do with them, how to deal with them. Until I went through calligraphic work.
Yeah.
Series of calligraphic work, which I did in Karachi with the help of my brother, which you can see in the exhibition. So through that, I become interested in the color variation. So I thought maybe if I introduce some color in those black and white patterns, I will see what happens as an experiment. So I began, this is much later work, not the early one. So I did simple arrangement, produce a square within a square based on number 9. If you count the number 9, the inside square was also on number 9. So,
which also appears much earlier, and it appears in the first sculpture.
We're going back.
Yeah, no, I know, but just to emphasize the importance of the 3x3 grid for you.
So they said, I said, okay, let me do one more and one more. And they kept on developing.
Yeah.
So now I have more than 100 paintings.
And they've become deeply, I don't know, for me, the most recent ones with the circles, they're becoming more and more psychedelic. They're really, they're kind of hallucinatory.
As
paintings.
I mentioned before, a lot of things happened by chance. And when I was in Greece, in Athens, and I was staying in a hotel. So in the dining room of the hotel, there was a furniture piece, a sideboard. And the door of the board was carved. And it was carved in both in a square and a circle. I thought that is very interesting, the way they relate the circle with the square. So I took a photograph and experimented with that when I came back home. And that's how the circle came into being in the work. Then I introduced hexagon. how hexagon came into. The work I had to do with the one Abbemuseum, sculpture number 3. We had to make those holes in the garden, and those holes are of hexagon. And you asked me to give you drawing of the hexagon. So I didn't know. I had forgotten my geometry. I tried to draw hexagon. I couldn't. So I look into the computer. And I found the hexagon. So I got the printout and I put all the dimensions I sent to you. It was a copy of that drawing was lying around in my papers. One day I said, maybe I should do something with the hexagon. That's how hexagon came into the work.
Rasheed, we're going to draw to a close in a second, but we must talk about, to close, the extraordinary structure that is outside, homage to Tatlin. When I remember then, when Garage were first saying, we're going to do it, we're going to make it, I couldn't quite believe it, and here it is. There's a maquette for this work. We were looking at the picture of it before. It's from 67? No,
68.
68. Talk us through why did you make a maquette as an homage to Tatlin in 1968?
You have that image?
Not here, unfortunately, no.
You got in your mobile?
No. It's on my computer.
You showed me.
It's on my computer.
Okay.
Why did you make an homage to Tatlin in 1968?
If you look at the maquette in the exhibition, there are 3 different structures. One is the cube.
It's the same here, we have the image here.
No, not this one. Maquette, early maquette, which is on the shelf. In a aluminum, silver color. They are different structure. One is a cube with the one diagonal. Other one is the structure number 2 with the 4 or 5 diagonal. Number 3 is a vertical piece, which I did in 68. Is meant for a 10 feet structure. There are 3 different books. Structure number 1, structure number 2, and the untitled vertical piece, which you see here. One day I was just playing around. I put the number 2 inside the number 1, and then put the vertical piece in the center. And I look at it. Oh God, this is Tatlin. So it became homemade to Tatlin.
On that note, I think, do we have time for any questions? Yeah. If there are any questions, how would we do it with translations? Okay, so we'll pass the microphone in that here. Yeah. So if there are any questions from the audience? at this point.
Don't be shy.
Rasheed, Rasheed, and Nick, thank you very much. Rasheed, thank you very much for your talk. I wanted to ask a question or maybe talk to you about the work with circles on the water. Could we return to this picture if you don't mind? Mm-hmm. Rasheed, you said that you started to deconstruct symmetry, destroy symmetry, and that's the path to infinity. But in this work, what I can see is on the contrary. It's totally asymmetrical, and but there is still symmetry in it because they are circles, and in these circles, it's also about infinity. Also, the space you use, this pond. I don't know how to explain it. This platform. You use water. That's a space of no return. You can't return to the original shape of the circles. It's always changing, right? In Russia, we have a saying that you can't enter the same water twice. Like the water is always changing. So it's not symmetry to asymmetry. I would say that it's a path of asymmetry to symmetry backwards. And in this work, it's all about eternity. It all is eternity already.
Yeah. I totally agree. They're about symmetry and asymmetry. There's a constant relationship between symmetry and asymmetry. Yeah. You're right.
10 out of 10.
Спасибо, Рашид.
Будут еще вопросы, друзья? Не стесняйтесь. У вас еще есть?
Рашид, а вот
Rasheed,
вот тема расизма, она
I was wondering
присутствовала
about the topic of
в
racism.
работах. Вот что вы думаете?
You had it in your works a lot.
Вот что сейчас
What do you
происходит?
think about it? What is happening
На
now
данный
with
момент, в
racism?
2019
Now,
году.
in 2019, is
Есть
this
ли
topic
это
still
актуально
relevant? Are people
не
still
только в мире,
racist?
конкретно в Лондоне?
Maybe not only in the whole world, but in
UK,
London, in UK in
Спасибо.
particular. Thank you very much.
Racism exists in different levels. Racism in the street, which sometimes is very violent. After Enoch Powell's speech in '68, British parliamentarian and the important member of the Conservative Party, he said, Americans can never become part of the British society. Small numbers can live in Britain so long they don't interfere in the mainstream system. Following his speech, there emerged a group of young boys called skinheads. They went around beating Asian people. Many people were actually killed, particularly in East London. You will see reference to that in the performance, in the exhibition. That level of racism has been now recognized by the government, and the bill has been passed by the government. Now it is illegal to be racist. That change has taken place. But there's other racism which is entrenched, embedded within the system, because the system is still the legacy of imperialism. The institutions in Britain have not gone through anti-imperialist struggle. It hasn't gone through anti-colonial struggle. They have given independence to the colonies, but they have not liberated themselves. So institutional racism is still there. What system is doing is trying to cover it up through policies, through the program of diversity, giving fund to organizations who are fighting racism. But system will never recognize that the racism is there within the system. That is the problem. And you can't deal with it because system has to change. And system doesn't want to change.
Any more questions for Rasheed?
Hello, thank you very much for the talk. It was very interesting and very rich. I was wondering about what you said. You said that your works were accidental, but how important is it to have certain foundation, color theory, painting theory? What is the ratio for your art, the ratio between formal training and accidents, or formal foundation and accidental inspiration? So that's what I wanted to ask you about.
That question can only be answered by theorists. I'm not a theorist.
But I think, I mean, you've said to me many times that intuition, chance, imagination, instinct, these are all what have produced your works more than certainly a formal training or certainly any engagement with things like color theory. So for me, there's what I see is, an insistence on the imagination, on instinct, on intuition is playing a really important part in your work.
Well, my research work of the last 10 years, which includes calligraphy, and the calligraphy invokes the golden period of Islamic civilization. I use the names of important thinkers like Avicenna, Al-Baruni, Al-Faridi, Averroes, who was a great influence in the development of ideas in Europe, Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Then I turned to geometry. In both theories, I use very bright colors because I want to celebrate that achievement. So they are celebratory, these colors, as a festival.
Any more? So I think on that, yeah.
Here.
Uh,
Ну, тогда я спрошу на русском, наверное, так будет проще.
Как вам комфортно? Тут в обе стороны перевод. Тут в обе стороны перевод, как вам комфортно?
Okay. So I've just read a very great and interesting text by you, which was dedicated to Magicien de la Terre, a very famous exhibition curated by Jean-Hubert Martin in
It's in English.
1989. And you kind of introduced some critique of that exhibition. Do you believe that curators learned something since then? Did they learn how to create such kind of exhibitions? Did something changed since those times? And are you happy with the exhibition that was created here at Garage Museum?
what is the question?
The question is.
You don't need
Yeah.
to speak English.
Okay, я могу по-русски.
I think can I try and tell me if I get it wrong. The question was thinking about the shift in curatorial approaches from Magicien de la Terre in terms of dealing with questions of
Representation of Western and non-Western artists, let's say so.
Yeah, change has taken place because in the magician show, the exhibition was divided 50%. 50% was European white artists. And their work to do with modernism and avant-gardism was the artists chosen from Africa, Asia, Aboriginal in Australia, Native American from America, what to do with tradition. Idea behind this separation was, in the words of the curator Jean-Hubert Martin, that there was no authentic modernism which came out of third world. If there is an authentic expression of creativity, it is still in that tradition. So he wanted to show authentic work, which was not only misguided, but misinformed. I did write a critique, but things have changed now. Because now the system have recognized modernism coming out of Africa, Asia, Latin America, even Aboriginal artists from Australia. They are put together as part of the Biennale now. Art festival, you will see them everywhere. In fact, you can't see any Biennale without African, Asian, and other artists, the rest of the world. But there is still a difference. Because the history of art is still the history of white artists. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to say a huge thank you to the interpreter for doing an extraordinary job. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you again to everyone at Garage, and a huge thank you to Rasheed Araeen. Thank you.